Imagine it's 1940. The world is falling apart. Nazi Germany is speed running through Europe with their blitzkrieg tactics, and the U.S. Army is looking at its motor pool and seeing horses. Yeah, literally horses and some motorcycles that were basically bicycles with an attitude. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps realized they needed a midget car, something light, 4x4, and tough enough to get shot at and keep rolling. So they sent out a Dear John letter to 135 car companies saying, "Hey, build us a 1,300 pounds prototype in 49 days or don't bother showing up." Most companies looked at that deadline and said, absolutely not. But 3 companies, one tiny underdog, one struggling midsize, and one massive giant, decided to hold my beer. First up, the Bantam BRC 60, the Blitz Buggy, the Vibe Underdog Energy. Starting off with the true original. Bantam was a tiny company from Pennsylvania that was basically on its last legs. They didn't even have an engineering staff. They hired a freelancer named Carl Probst, who reportedly drafted the entire design for the first Jeep in 18 hours. The BRC 60 was a Blitz Buggy. It had bug-eye headlights and a rounded hood that made it look a bit like a very angry toaster. It passed every test the Army threw at it. But the Army had a problem. They didn't trust Bantam's mom-and-pop factory to build 600,000 of anything. So they shared Bantam's blueprints with the big boys, Willys and Ford, which, in business terms, is called the Big Oof. Up next, the Willys Quad, the Vibe, the Gym Rat. Right on the heels of the Bantam was the Willys Overland Quad. It was heavy, it was clunky, but it had the Go Devil engine. Designed by Barney Roos, this engine was the secret sauce. While Bantam and Ford were messing around with 40-ish horsepower, Willys brought 60 horses to the party. The only problem? The quad was a chonky boy. It was way over the weight limit. Legend has it the engineers tore it down and literally shaved the heads off the bolts and used thinner paint just to make weight. It worked. Moving along, the Ford Pygmy, the Vibe, the fashion icon. Rounding out the original trio, we have Ford's first try, the Pygmy. It used an engine from a tractor, which was okay, but what Ford really brought was style and utility. They gave the Pygmy a flat hood and headlights tucked behind the grille. Why? So you could lay a map on the hood without it blowing away, and so your headlights didn't get smashed by every tree branch in the Ardennes. The Army looked at it and said, "We're stealing that." Then came the Bantam BRC 40, the Vibe, the Lend-Lease Special. As we move into early production, Bantam still got to make about 2,600 of these updated models. Since the U.S. was already eyeing the Willys/Ford combo for main event, they shipped most of these to the Brits and the Soviets. If you see a vintage photo of a Jeep in a Russian snow in 1941, there's a good chance it's this Bantam Survivor. Following that, the Willys MB, the Vibe, the beta version. Just before standardization, Willys made 1,553 of these MA models. It had the gear shift on the steering column, fancy, and no storage pockets. Today, these are the holy grail for collectors. If you find one in your grandpa's barn, congratulations, you're retired. Right behind it, the Ford GP, the Vibe, the name giver. Simultaneously, Ford was pumping out the GP. The G stood for government, and P was Ford's code for a passenger car with an 80-inch wheelbase. Some people swear that saying GP fast is how we got the word Jeep. Others say it was named after Eugene the Jeep, a magical teleporting dog thing from the Popeye cartoons. Honestly, both stories are better than the truth. The big reveal, the Willys MB, the GOAT, the Vibe, the main character. Now we reach the legend. By late 1941, the Army took the Willys engine and the Ford-style flat hood and smashed them together into the Willys MB. This is the one you see in every movie. It had a blackout light system, so you could drive at night without getting spotted by a Luftwaffe pilot, and it was a masterpiece of utility. It could be an ambulance, a radio shack, a machine gun platform, or a very uncomfortable taxi for four generals. Side by side, the Ford GPW, the vibe, the carbon copy. Because one factory was enough, the Army told Ford, build the Willys design. Ford agreed, but being Ford, they had an ego. They called theirs the GPW, W for Willys. Henry Ford actually hated that he was building someone else's car. To make sure everyone knew Ford built it, they stamped a tiny letter F on almost every single bolt, nut, and bracket. If you're restoring one today and the bolt doesn't have an F, you're doing it wrong. Getting weird, the Ford GPA, the Seep. The vibe, the midlife crisis. But the Army wasn't done experimenting. They wanted a Jeep that was also a boat. We called it the Seep, see Jeep. The reality, it was terrible. It was too heavy on land, and it sank in anything rougher than a bathtub. The U.S. troops hated it, but the Soviet Red Army loved it. Why? Because Russia has a lot of rivers, and sinking occasionally was still better than walking. Adding more wheels, the Willys MTUG, the 6x6. The vibe, the long boy. Up next in the larger-than-life category is the MTUG, a 3/4-ton 6x6 Jeep. It was designed to pull heavy artillery. It worked great, but it was basically a mini truck, and the Army already had the deuce and a half for that. Only a handful were made. It's the Jeep equivalent of a limousine. For the special ops, the SAS Desert Raider Jeep. The vibe, Mad Max, 1942. Shifting gears to the front lines, the British Special Air Service, SAS, took standard Jeeps and turned them into nightmare machines. They cut the grills out to keep the engine cool in 120-degree heat, mounted Vickers K-machine guns everywhere, and strapped dozens of fuel cans to the sides. They would drive these into Nazi airfields at night, guns blazing, and blow up entire wings of aircraft before disappearing back into Sahara. Absolute legends. On airfield duty, the Follow Me Jeep, the vibe, the safety vest of cars. While the SAS were being cool, these Jeeps were being useful. Painted in bright yellow and black checkerboard patterns, their job was to guide massive, battle-damaged B-17 bombers to their parking spots. It's like the little tugboat of the sky, but with four-wheel drive. The what were they thinking? Moment. The Hafner rode a buggy. The vibe, actual insanity. If you thought the boat Jeep was weird, check this out. Someone thought, let's put a giant helicopter rotor on top and a tail fin on the back. They would tow this behind a plane, and the Jeep would auto-gyro down to the ground. It actually worked. It flew at 65 miles per hour. But everyone realized that landing a wooden glider full of troops was way less terrifying than being a flying Jeep pilot. Across the borders, the international cousins. The vibe, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. To wrap up our list, we have to look at the frenemies. The Soviet GAZ-64, basically a Jeep with a Russian accent, built using Bantam blueprints and tough as nails. The Japanese Kurogane Type 95, the only Japanese 4x4 of the war. It looked like a cross between a Jeep and a golf cart. The German Kübelwagen, the VW Beetle's angry cousin. It wasn't 4WD, but it was light and had a flat belly that let it slide over mud. It was a Jeep's primary rival, but it couldn't climb like the MB. General Eisenhower said the Jeep was one of the three tools that won the war. It didn't just carry soldiers. It carried hope. By 1945, they had built over 640,000 of these things. When the GIs came home, they didn't want to go back to boring sedans. They wanted the mighty midget. Willys started making the CJ civilian Jeep, and the rest is history. So, next time you see a Jeep Wrangler at a mall, remember, its great-grandpa was a 60-horsepower underdog that literally punched Hitler in the face.